People, what's one secret you and a parent have kept from the other parent? My mom is from Thailand and converted from Buddhism to Christianity. However, she still strongly believes in ghosts, especially those related to sudden, violent deaths, which is a common belief in Thailand. It's kind of like living in an area where there are bears or snakes. Ghosts are just part of everyday life. My dad bought a 30-acre property for a steal from the state. About 6 months after moving there, I visited him, and one evening, while sitting around a campfire, he had this mischievous look on his face. He said, "Don't tell your mom, but..." Apparently, the reason the property was so cheap was because the previous owner had set his house on fire and offed himself using a gun while wearing socks on his hands to make it look like his wife had offed him. The idea was that the socks would burn off and leave no fingerprints, making it look like a staged murder. The problem was that the fire didn't burn fast enough, and the firemen put it out, finding the body and immediately identifying it as a self-offing case. Turns out, the guy had been going through a divorce and had some serious mental issues. My mom would have freaked out. But she had been living there for 6 months without any spooky experiences. Eventually, my dad told her the story, and as expected, she immediately called a preacher to bless the property. Well, it wasn't a secret we kept for long, but it certainly counts. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I'm not sure if this counts, since it was my aunt's longtime live-in boyfriend, but here's the story. Uncle Jim had lived with my aunt for about 20 years. The attic of their house was his personal space, a man cave of sorts, with a workbench for his models and electronics projects, a huge record collection, Playboys, and a stash of weed. I was around 22 years old, sometime in the mid-90s. I had brought something up to Jim in the attic, maybe a beer, and ended up just sitting there while he worked on a model car and listened to a Johnny Cash record. We were chatting about my new job and other stuff when Jim suddenly looked out the window toward the house next door. A little backstory. We had known the neighbors for years. It was a couple with 2 sons and a daughter. The wife worked at McDonald's and would always give us promotional items, plates, Star Wars glasses, etc., and coupon books for Christmas. Jim looked at me and said, "You want to hear something messed up?" "Sure," I replied. A couple of years ago, I was up here smoking a joint, with the lights off. I looked out the window, and I saw the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. Neighbor was banging his daughter. He went on to say that her brothers had also taken turns. He'd seen it happen a few times, and they never bothered to turn off her bedroom light or close the shade. Jim passed away from a heart attack about a year later. He smoked a pack a day for most of his life. I never told my aunt or my parents. The girl next door was over 18 at that point, and I had no proof of anything that Jim had said. Maybe he was messing with me, but that wasn't really his style. He always talked to me like an adult, not like a kid, which is one of the things I liked about him. Story 3. Mom knows now, but it was a secret for a long time, only revealed when I cut her out of my life. Back in 2006, when MySpace was booming and customizing your profile made you instantly cool, I started experimenting with HTML, CSS, and web design. My MySpace profile was top tier. As I got more into it, I started building my own websites and selling them to local businesses. During this time, I spent a lot of time experimenting on the family computer. I eventually learned about text fields for forms and input types, which allowed me to give customers a way to update their websites without contacting me directly, all while keeping their information secure. But in doing so, I realized that by changing a certain field, I could unmask stored passwords. While they were just stored passwords, it was enough for me to see them. So one day, I decided to log into both of my parents' email accounts at school as a test. My dad had nothing of interest, but my mom's account had something that caught my eye. She had just received an email from my uncle. Curiosity took over, so I read it. It was a long conversation where my mom basically confessed that she hated being a mom, hated my dad, hated living abroad, and hated each of us for different reasons. She also went into detail about her affair and her plans to leave us, with my uncle fully supporting her. When I got home, I printed the email and handed it to my dad when he arrived, without my mom noticing. My dad acted quickly. He canceled her credit cards and took other steps to lock her out of the family's finances and property. A few years later, when they divorced, my dad handed her the printed email alongside the divorce papers. The email, in which she admitted to having an affair and planning to abandon the family, was used as evidence for adultery, and the judge ruled in my dad's favor. My mom got nothing. After the divorce, my mom tried to rally my siblings and me to support her. She lied, claiming that my dad had paid off the judge to screw her out of everything, and that she needed us to help her. My siblings were initially on her side, and my dad never mentioned the email, simply denying her accusations and refusing to back down. During this time, I didn't speak to my dad. A few months later, Mom invited me to my aunt's place, where she was staying. Once I arrived, I found that my other siblings were also coming. When we were all there, she tried to manipulate us by twisting our relationship with my dad and using our issues with him to her advantage. Then she made a comment that really angered me. She said, "I've always looked out for you, and your dad kept trying to break out of the marriage and leave us stranded." I couldn't keep quiet anymore, so I called her out. I reminded her of the insults she'd made about each of us all those years ago, called her an adulterer, and named her a fair partner. She was stunned for a moment, then flew into a rage, claiming my dad had made the whole thing up. My siblings stayed quiet, and that's when I told her it was me who had found the email years ago and given it to Dad. She called me a liar, so I told her email password, something I had memorized after checking her email for a while. That was how I knew about the credit card cancellations and how she was moved out of the savings account. She was speechless, and I took that moment to end all contact with her, exactly as she wanted all those years ago. Once I was done, I got up and left. My siblings later told me that my sister called Dad right then, put him on speakerphone, and asked him to confirm everything I had just told them. Since then, none of us have had any contact with her. We have no idea what she does for a living or where she lives now. Story 4. When I was about 8 years old, I was helping my dad put up Christmas lights on the second-floor roof. This was the 80s, so safety wasn't exactly a priority. He told me to grab another strand of lights, and as I walked to the edge of the roof, which was pretty flat, I lost my footing and slipped right off. I landed on the picnic table below, completely unhurt. My dad didn't even realize I had fallen until I yelled, "I'm okay." He was absolutely freaked out when he turned around and didn't see me, but after making sure I was fine, he made me promise I'd never tell my mom about it. That was the last year we ever put up lights on the roof. Edit. To add some context, yeah, my dad was seriously freaked out when he turned around and didn't hear me. As some people have pointed out, at that age, you're pretty flexible, and I was so scrawny that I didn't weigh more than 60 pounds. I didn't even break the table. Story 5. My dad never truly got over his ex, who ended up marrying his brother. Back in high school, I had it all. I was acing my classes, a star on the track team, had a solid group of friends, and never struggled with relationships. But when I got to college, things took a turn. Classes were harder, I got injured and had to quit athletics, and I hardly met anyone outside of my classes since I lived off campus and worked full-time to pay for it all. I hit a major dry spell. For a creative writing class, we had to keep a journal. One entry talked about feeling down after being rejected by someone I thought was into me. My dad found the journal on the one computer we had at home. One night, he pulled me aside, handed me a beer, and told me his own version of the story. According to him, the girl I wrote about had actually been into him back in high school. They started dating, but after they moved away, she realized she didn't feel the same and came back home. A few years later, my dad moved back too and bumped into my mom, who he'd met a few times before, but never pursued. They fell in love, got married, and had my sister. Soon after, he found out that his brother had started dating his ex and that they were getting married. My uncle and aunt had my cousin, who became my best childhood friend. So growing up, my dad had to be around his ex and his brother all the time. It ate him up inside, but he hid it well, and my mom never had a clue. Dad passed away a few years after telling me that story, and I never told my mom. Story 6. My mom thinks the huge scar across my dad's chest is from a motorcycle accident he had before they met. But that's not the real story. The truth is that the scar is from a gang fight he got into while serving 8 years on Rikers Island. I found out the real story when I was in my early 20s. I was digging through old boxes looking for some documents for school when I came across an old DOC folder. It was my dad's prison records. I couldn't believe what I found. He was a runner for the Gambino crime family. I was shocked, especially since, well, he's black. It turns out he got arrested after hitting a crew of Irish guys who had attacked some of his associates. He got sentenced to 10 years at Rikers. Because he and the two other guys he was charged with weren't made men and were black, they had little protection from the Irish inside. The Irish retaliated, and he got shived in a cafeteria fight. He only served 8 of the 10 years, and when he got out, he was done with the mob life. He was gifted an envelope with $10,000 in it, a lot of money back in 1975, for staying loyal. After that, he left that world behind. Not long after, he met my mom. A year later, they were married, and soon after, my big sis came along. For years later, I was born. I asked him about the folder, and he gave me the full story. When I asked if my mom or my big sis knew, he said no, and made it clear they never would. He gave me the death stare, and I replied, "Yes, sir. They won't." And that was the last time we ever spoke about it. That's one secret I'll take to the grave. Story 7. I had one of these experiences up until recently. It may not quite fit the scope of the question, but a funny story is still a funny story. I was going on a senior class trip and had saved up some money to treat myself while I was there. My family didn't have much money at the time, so I made it a point to save up on my own so my parents wouldn't have to cover any extra expenses. A few days before the trip, my dad handed me a few $100 and says, "Here, have a great time and make some lasting memories. Don't tell your mother." Naturally, I agreed and kept it to myself. The very next day, my mom gives me a few $100 and says, "Here, have a great time and make some lasting memories. Don't tell your father." Naturally, I agreed and kept it to myself. The trip was incredible. I was able to do way more than I had planned and even helped out a few friends so they could enjoy it more too. I told my parents about the trip, and each of them separately gave me a little wink-wink, nudge-nudge, and were really happy for me. Fast forward decades later, and I was visiting my family with my own kids. The topic of "don't tell the other parent" came up, and I told them about how both of them had secretly given me extra money for the trip, and how I happily played along and didn't spill the beans. They looked at each other with wide eyes, then burst out laughing, playfully swatting at each other's arms. Story 8. When I was 13, I transferred from overseas to America. My dad arranged all the testing, and before I knew it, I was a 13-year-old light-skinned kid from India, placed as a sophomore in high school, way ahead of my grade. My parents fought fiercely over it, especially my mom, who thought I'd be socially ostracized. I didn't even know what that word meant at the time, so I had to look it up. My mom, who teaches Latin, always threw around big words like that, and I was often left scratching my head. At school, I was dared to streak during a basketball game for $500. Of course, some rich classmate handed me the money without hesitation. I opened a window, hid a change of clothes in a classroom, and got bare under the bleachers, wearing only a full Batman mask. As soon as the halftime buzzer went off, I ran across the gym like Usain Bolt, jumped back in the window, threw my clothes on, and escaped out the other side of the school. The next day, I was called to the principal's office, and my dad had to come with me. The principal asked if I had been paid $500 to do it. I denied it, and my dad quickly defended me, saying, "That's racist, a kid with light brown skin?" The principal let it slide, and my dad didn't even ask if I had done it. He just listened to me deny it for 20 minutes after school. Now, I hid the $500 in my shoes, tucked between the insole and the sole. I didn't wear those shoes to school, but my mom decided to wash them. I walked in the door, and she said, "I washed all the tennis shoes by the back door. Honey, did you put $500 in your shoes?" My dad, looking puzzled for a moment, quickly caught on. He replied, "Oh yeah, I was going to buy a power washer, but didn't. Thanks, honey." Then he added that I was one of the top students in my class, which is why the principal had wanted to talk to me. An hour later, my dad came to my room and said, "Listen here, you get $400, $100 is mine. It's the a-hole tax. You're getting taxed for being an a-hole." Then he gave me a warning. "If you ever tell your mom what you did, she'll put you back in the 8th grade, and worse, she'll rub it in my face that you were ostracized and trying to fit in." At my parents' 50th anniversary party, my dad wrote down 10 things he had kept from my mom and read them aloud. My 2 sisters weren't mentioned, but the streaking incident, him catching me and my girlfriend on a picnic table, catching me sneaking in after sneaking out, and even my speeding ticket for 133 in a 55 miles per hour zone all made the list. Story 9. The secret that my father cheated on my mother and caused their divorce was something my mom kept from us for years. After they separated, she found someone else, and my dad tried to turn us against her. She didn't want us to know or get involved until one day. I told her that if that was the case, she should just leave and stay gone. That's when she finally came clean and told me everything. I didn't know what to do with the information or if I should even believe it, so I shared the story with my two brothers. My younger brother was so angry, he went straight to our dad and asked him if he had ever cheated. My dad's response was a mix of stuttering and anger. He asked, "What did your mother bring that up for?" then walked away. Later, he came back to me, crying, and admitted that it was true. He broke up the marriage, not her. He had tried to turn us against her. After that, we stopped listening to anything he had to say about her because he's just a bitter old man now, refusing to accept that his actions had consequences and constantly trying to blame her. He still has no idea how my brother found out. It was through me. I called my mom right after that, apologized to her, and told her that if she kept hiding the truth, we could never know the full story. I told her that she needed to be honest with me, as we have a great relationship built on trust and no secrets between us. Story 10. When I was 16, I was with my parents at an Air Force base. My mom had to step out of the lobby for a minute, and my dad went with her, leaving me alone in an office with two guys working as receptionists. As soon as my mom left, I overheard them mocking her medical condition. For privacy and respect, I won't get into the specifics, but I was furious. When my parents came back, I typed a message on my phone and showed it to my dad, telling him what I heard. His face went beet red, but he kept his cool until we were done. He told me to take my mom to the car and wait for him. I knew what was about to happen. The roof was going to come down. I didn't get to see what went down, but when he returned, he told me he had asked for the base commander and confronted the guys. They tried to claim I lied or misheard, but eventually they admitted it and apologized. My dad, a veteran, wasn't about to let anyone disrespect his wife or lie about it. When he left the room, he said the whole lobby was staring at him because of how loud he was. Honestly, I wish they'd been kicked out entirely, but I'm sure they faced some kind of punishment. When he came back to the car, he was completely calm, with a poker face, like nothing had happened. We've never told my mom, and I don't think we ever will. I love my dad for how much he protects and cares for her. Story 11. I've got a story to share, but it's a secret my mom kept from my grandma. Back in the 70s, when my mom was a small child, it was winter, and snow was everywhere. My grandpa and mom were having some fun driving around in the snow, doing donuts and sliding around, just classic snow fun. At one point, while doing a donut, Grandpa slid a bit further than expected and hit a fire hydrant. It wasn't hard enough to break it, but it did dent the fender. My mom said the dent was about the size of her hand when she was little. Grandpa asked her to promise not to tell her mom about it. A week later, my grandma, my mom's mom, was driving in town with my mom to get groceries. The snow was still around, and my grandma wasn't the best driver, sliding into curbs a few times. When they got home, she noticed the dent on the fender and panicked. She thought one of the times she slid into the curb had caused it, so she asked my mom to keep it a secret from Grandpa. Years later, Grandpa passed away, and my family was having dinner with Grandma, sharing fun stories about him. That's when my mom finally spilled the beans about her double secret. Grandma just busted out laughing because for all those years, no one had told each other about the dent, Grandpa, because he knew he caused it, and Grandma, because she thought she had. They kept that car for 15 years with the dent, both pretending it wasn't there. It was so wonderful to see Grandma laugh that day. Grandpa was a great man and a lot of fun. He was more of a father to me than my own dad. I miss him a lot, and I'll keep sharing stories of him for years to come. Story 12. My mother, 72, has been having an affair for at least 25 years. From what I know, she only sees the other man a few times a year, as he lives in another part of the country. I've never told my stepfather about it, and I feel guilty for keeping this secret. He's a really good guy, and I know he deserves better. I don't want to risk hurting my relationship with either of them. I feel selfish for not saying anything. Part of me is afraid of losing him from my life, and another part of me doesn't want to carry the guilt of being the one to break the news. She has no idea that I know, as I discovered the affair while fixing her computer. I first found out about it in the late 1990s, and just a couple of years ago, I realized it was still ongoing. What she doesn't know is that I also know she cheated on my biological father in the 1970s, which is why they got divorced. I have good relationships with both men, but I feel like I'm living a lie, and I know both of them deserve better than this situation. Story 13. Does it count if I'm the parent? My son, who's now 5, is just too pure for this world. Whenever he makes a mistake, he comes to us and admits what he did wrong, usually with tears in his eyes, even if it's no big deal. The other day, he was playing with cars in the toy room, knocked something over on the desk, and came running to find us in our bedroom to admit his mistake. He's an amazing kid, and I love him with all my heart. So last year, he did something a bit more significant. He was jumping off our bed onto a pile of blankets, and in the process, accidentally grabbed my wife's pearl necklace, causing it to snap with pearls flying everywhere. This wasn't just any necklace, it was the one her grandmother, who basically raised her, wore every day. It's her most prized heirloom, and the only piece of her grandma she still has. Naturally, he starts crying, pearls are everywhere, and my wife's downstairs. I quickly reassured him, saying, "Okay, buddy, it's all right. Don't cry about this one, okay? Help me gather the pearls, and I'll fix it before Mommy finds out. Whatever you do not tell Mommy." After about 100 more, "it's okays and don't tell Mommies," we gathered everything up, and I took it to a jeweler to see if they could fix it. Unfortunately, they couldn't. So, I went on YouTube, learned how to attach pearls to the necklace, and secretly ordered a chain. I got it fixed and put it back in her jewelry box before she noticed it was missing. I honestly think I did a pretty good job. That is, until this year. Fast forward to October. We're having dinner when out of nowhere, my son says, "Mommy, I'm sorry." My wife asks, "Sorry? For what?" And with zero regard for the plan, my son, tears in his eyes, says, "I'm sorry I broke your necklace, and I'm sorry for not telling you because Daddy said not to." My head hit the table. My wife looks at me, and I give her the play-along wink. I respond, "What necklace? I don't remember that." She quickly follows up, "All my necklaces are great, bud. Nothing broke." After he calms down and leaves the table, my wife turns to me and says, "Okay, now what is going on?" So, I showed her the necklace and explained the whole story. She was really cool about it and said she hadn't even noticed it was different, since it's more of a sentimental piece than something she wears often. I still haven't told my son that his mom knows about the necklace, and I never will. It's kind of nice being on this side of the secret. Story 14. One night in high school, my friends and I were chilling in a parking lot in our small New England town. I had my family car, a 2006 Nissan Pathfinder, and had just gotten my license. There was nothing better than cruising around with my friends, smoking, blasting music, and hanging out in parking lots. I had my BB gun, a CO2-powered pistol, with me, and we were shooting at trees and random stuff. I thought it'd be cool to shoot at the license plate of the Pathfinder, which I had done before. But this time, I accidentally shot out the back window. One of my friends was in the car, reclined in the front seat with a headache, and she screamed in fear and confusion. I realized I was in deep trouble with my parents, so I panicked and decided to cover it up. We drove, now with a completely shattered back window, over to Rite Aid to grab a dustpan and a bag. We cleaned up all the glass, and then drove to a sketchier part of town. I parked next to a small graveyard, scattered the glass around, and staged it like a break-in. I got out my flip phone, called my parents, and faked crying, telling them the car window had been broken into while we were walking downtown. My dad drove out to meet us, and they didn't suspect a thing. I was so proud of myself for getting away with it. Years later, about 3 or 4 years down the line, the story came up, and I decided to tell my dad, who is my best friend. He laughed and told me he knew we were lying from the moment he arrived, specifically because of my best friend's face. She looked so suspicious, hilariously because she was the actress of the group and was really involved in theater. She played in Frank in our high school production. Anyway, it always gives me a good laugh thinking about that night and how my dad kept the secret from my mom, who definitely would not have found it funny, to this day. Story 15. My dad once told me how my mom forged his signature to remortgage the house so she could go shopping. When he found out, all she could say was, "It's only money." My dad also bailed her out of credit card debts multiple times, tens of thousands of dollars each time. The last time, he had to refinance part of the house to cover nearly £50,000 in credit card bills. When I was clearing out their house to sell it, I found a sheet of paper with all the calculations of how much my mom owed. She had nothing to show for all that spending. My dad told me the only reason he stayed was because of me and my brother. I never told my mom I knew, because I knew she'd just lie about it. My dad passed away 2 years before my mom. I miss him a lot, but I couldn't care less about my mom. Sorry if that sounds heartless, but my mom was never a very nice person. Story 16. My mom used to send my dad into my room to spank me. He would whisper to me that we were going to play a little pretend game to make my mom happy. He would tell me he was going to clap his hands, and I needed to pretend to cry like I was being spanked. I really didn't realize how awesome my dad was for doing that until much later in life. His own dad was pretty abusive to him, and he couldn't stand the thought of hitting a kid because of it. Story 17. We've told her the truth now, but at the time, and for a while after, we both pretended that we visited my mom in the hospital just because we were both free. Dad's meeting had been canceled, and I didn't have class yet. Actually, it was because the hospital had called and told us that if we waited to visit her that evening, as we usually did, we might be too late to see her again. Apparently, the mood lift-off seeing loved ones can make the difference, and did that day, the staff thought. She also thought we left after a couple of hours. Actually, she lost consciousness, and we sat watching her vital signs monitors for most of the day. When she came to, it was our usual visit time, and she didn't think anything of it. This was over 20 years ago now. She's alive and well. Story 18. When my daughter was 4, she really wanted to play with the strings of magnetic balls I had on my desk. I know they say for children over the age of 12, but she was having a really good time. She came up to me about 20 minutes later meekly saying, "Daddy?" And I could see that the bottom of one was sticking out her nose. Not knowing how many were up there, I gently used bigger magnets. I had to coax the whole string out. Was decided to never share any of that incident with Mom. Story 19. The first time I got drunk at a party, I was completely hammered and way too scared to take a cab. Then, I remembered what my mom always told me. I could call her for help anytime, and she'd be there with no judgment. So I called her. She came to pick me up, no questions asked. All she did was make sure I was safe and had enough water to try and prevent a massive hangover. There was no yelling, no guilt for waking her up at 3 a.m., just a reassuring, "I'm proud of you for calling me for help." My dad, who would have probably had a panic attack if he knew I was drunk, still thinks I was picked up because I was just sleepy instead. Thanks, Mom. Story 20. My sisters and I once found fantasy love letters that my mom had written to other men, none of whom were my dad. I knew they were just fantasies because she didn't even know half of these men, and some were happily married. The letters were full of her dreams about running off with these men and having their baby, even though she had a hysterectomy after her last pregnancy. She would write these letters, crumple them up, and toss them wherever. I'm honestly surprised my dad never found them. My youngest sister would scream at her, "Are you insane, Mom?" We just assumed she was unhappy with my dad, but none of us ever mentioned it to him. Story 21. My dad didn't keep it for long, but he found out I was having a suspected ectopic pregnancy before my mom did. It was 3 days before Christmas, and he came over to drop some things off, thinking I was at work. Instead, he found my hospital letter and me crying on the sofa, only an hour after being home. We're close, but not overly affectionate, yet he just stayed with me as I sobbed uncontrollably. He said, "I can tell your mom if you want me to, or I can keep it between us, and if it's something you want to share with her, you can tell her when you're ready." In the end, I asked him to tell her, but the way he handled it meant a lot to me. My mom is amazing, but I knew she would smother me with love and wouldn't let me out of her sight, and I just wanted some space to process. He took me to all my follow-up appointments, and on December 23rd, we found out the baby was growing exactly where she was meant to be. She's 4 now. Story 22. My dad and I would wrestle for fun. He'd pretend to let me win, then suddenly get super strong and toss me onto the couch. But on one particular day, he misjudged the throw and yeeted me straight into the end table. I was fine, but the lamp on the table definitely wasn't. We quickly cleaned it up and went to the antique store to buy a lamp almost identical to the one we broke. Mom never found out. Edit, she didn't notice. They moved it to their bedroom after we remodeled the downstairs, which happened after I nearly flooded the place with the toilet. My dad kept the secret to his grave. I think this story shows how awesome my dad was. It was a tough time when I was a teenager. One night, my friend and I were home alone, playing PS2. We were by ourselves because my mom was in the hospital getting her shoulder repaired after a bad fall. We were gaming. I went to the bathroom in my parents' room upstairs, and he said he had to run home for a minute. Shortly after, I went downstairs to grab a drink and heard a dripping noise. I thought, the bathroom sink downstairs must have a small leak. No big deal. I went back upstairs for a bit, finished my drink, and headed downstairs to put it in the dishwasher. Now the dripping sound was faster, but I thought, whatever. Back to PlayStation. Fast forward about 30 minutes. My friend is coming back over. Suddenly, I hear him screaming from the front door. Turn the frigging water off. I rush into my parents' room, and there's about 2 inches of water spilling out of the bathroom. I ran downstairs and found that what had started as a small drip had turned into Niagara Falls, flooding into the den. Around this time, my dad comes home from the hospital. He walks in, looks at the ceiling, looks at me, and looks at my friend. He didn't curse often, but he did this time. He said, today has been pretty backwards, hasn't it? A few days later, the insurance adjuster came out to assess the damage. It came to about $60,000 because it ruined the upstairs floor and poured onto an expensive leather armchair, an oriental rug, and hardwood floors. Here's why my dad was awesome. He was a contractor, so that insurance check ended up being a free remodel for him. The damage was minimal. He only had to replace a few boards in the ceiling and a single piece of drywall. The armchair was fine. It didn't even stain, just dried out on the back porch. The oriental rug needed cleaning, but the hardwoods didn't even warp. Thanks to me being a total brainlet with the toilet, he got to remodel the bathrooms, den, and kitchen for just the cost of materials. Story 23. My mom's cancer diagnosis. My mother struggled with severe alcoholism, which eventually led to alcohol-related dementia, known as Korsakoff syndrome. She had trouble remembering things, often forgetting what we told her just hours earlier. When she was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and secondary bone cancer in the hospital, she couldn't comprehend the severity of her condition and couldn't remember why she was so ill. In the months leading up to last Christmas, during the pandemic, we arranged for home care to assist her with daily tasks. My dad and I worked together to create a comforting story, telling her that the nurses and caregivers who helped with her showering, medication, and daily needs were there to help her get better and regain her strength. She embraced the care and enjoyed spending time with the nurses and carers who attended to her. Just before Christmas, she peacefully passed away in her sleep, unaware of her impending death, but surrounded by the love and support of her friends and family. Story 24. A few years ago, my wife and I went on a ski trip with some friends, and a few of them brought their kids, ages 4 to 7. I'm the type who's always first in line and last to leave the slopes. Once I start, I go until I can't anymore. But as the group started to tire out, I offered to take the kids with me for a bit. I took them up higher than the parents would have ever gone, and we got some good speed going. The kids were really good skiers. My niece, who was the youngest, started losing control and was heading straight for the trees. I managed to zip over and catch her just before she hit the tree line. We all came to a stop, and even though they were so young, we all silently agreed that this would stay between us. Not a word was said, but everyone knew. Turns out, my niece's earliest memory is that day. She doesn't remember the tree part, but she clearly remembers skiing with me up high. One day, I'll let my brother-in-law and sister-in-law know what happened, but I think I'll wait a few more years until the kids are done going up with Uncle Swaney McSwan. Story 25. When my mom and stepdad broke up, the day she left, taking me with her, I went back into the house to say goodbye. I had a good relationship with him, despite my mom being a bit unpredictable. I was in middle school at the time. He was devastated, and for the first time, he broke down and cried. He confided in me, telling me that the reason he had trouble getting along with my mom was because of an assault he endured as a child. He apologized and asked me to promise not to tell her or anyone else. I kept that promise. I often wondered if I should have told her, but keeping his secret was the only thing I felt I could do for him, and I still cared about him a lot. So, I never told anyone. I wouldn't have shared this here either, but sadly, he passed away a few years ago. It was really sad. He was a good man. But looking back, I know that it never would have worked with my mom anyway. Story 26. My mom and dad got into a heated debate about what shade of brown to paint the house. Mom wanted a lighter color, which my dad and I thought was way too light, while dad and I were leaning toward a darker shade, which of course, Mom thought was way too dark. When the painters came, they painted one side of the house a lighter brown, and after taking one look, Dad and I immediately decided we wanted the rest of the house darker. So they did it. Mom came home, absolutely loved how the house looked, and had no idea that 3 out of the 4 sides were not the color she had wanted. The one lighter side is against a bunch of trees, so it's close enough in color to the rest of the house that unless you're looking really closely or already know, it's almost impossible to tell. It's our little secret, and we're never going to spill the beans. In the end, everyone's happy with how the house turned out. Story 27. When I was a kid, I lost a stack of dollar bills, and my dad decided I needed to keep a detailed ledger for my allowance and all my purchases. If the numbers didn't add up at allowance time, there'd be consequences. He'd also go through every purchase, critique them, and point out what percentage of my annual income I'd spent on things like a t-shirt or a gift for a friend. To top it off, he wouldn't give me my allowance unless I asked for it specifically and presented my ledger for inspection. A few times, my mom would give me money for helping out with something, but since I was grounded for bad grades, I technically wasn't supposed to be earning an allowance. So I'd cook the books to make everything add up. Eventually, the whole thing got so over the top that I started outright stealing the money from my parents. I think my mom realized the ledger thing had gotten a little too ridiculous. Story 28. My dad grew up fairly wealthy, but being the youngest of 13, by the time he was old enough, there wasn't much left for him. No big deal, he worked his way through college, back in the 80s, when that was actually possible, and that's where he met my mom. My mom, on the other hand, grew up close to the poverty line. So when it came time for their wedding, my dad really wanted her to pick any wedding dress she wanted, no matter the price. But my mom, with her more practical view of money, ended up buying a secondhand dress. She never told him that, and they're both in their 50s now, still keeping that secret. They made me swear I'd never tell him either. Story 29. When I was 10, my older brother, who was 12, was bullied in middle school because we were poor and had always worn Payless shoes. One day, he fought back and got suspended. When my mom asked what happened, he didn't want to hurt her feelings, so he lied. I told her the truth, and she started to cry. The next day, she took us to a shoe store and bought all 3 of us Nikes, Ken Griffey's to be exact, which were really expensive. She made us promise not to tell our dad and told him they were super cheap on sale. She ended up buying us Nikes twice a year, even though they were way out of our budget, just so we wouldn't feel bad at school. I love you, Mom. Story 30. I grew up in a super strict religious household where I wasn't allowed to watch about 99% of what my classmates were into. I thought things might loosen up a bit when I hit high school, but they really didn't. It was pretty miserable. When I was a senior, South Park was really popular, and I hated that all my friends were talking about it, and I didn't get any of the references. My dad thought it was hilarious and didn't really agree with my mom's rules, but he still went along with them. However, South Park came on after my mom had gone to bed, so that became our thing. On South Park nights, my dad and I would stay up late and watch it together. We kept doing this throughout my senior year, and even during the first few years of college when I'd come home on breaks. Yep, the same rules were still in place. Sigh. It was a small, silly secret, but those are some of the best memories with my dad, just laughing and catching up during the commercials. Story 31. When I was a kid, I was playing Tekken 3 in the living room and kept dying to the boss. In a fit of frustration, I kicked the window and accidentally broke a grid. Our window had these grids. Panicked, I shoved a baseball in the hole and blamed it on the kids across the street who played baseball near where our houses met, since we lived on the corner. I ended up cutting my foot in the process and told my mom I was just trying to clean it. She knew right away it was me, but we were about to go to Universal Studios, and she didn't want to ruin it by telling my dad, who would have punished me and canceled the trip. Instead, she punished me by taking away the PS2 for a week, claiming I played too much video games, even though I had good grades. A few years later, my parents divorced, and to this day, we've never told my dad it was really me. We still ended up going to Universal right after that. Story 32. This is a silly one, but years ago, my dad was somewhat okay with having dogs, but was extremely germophobic about them. Still, after a lot of begging from me and my mom, we finally got a dog, with strict rules about where she could go, washing hands, and so on. One day, we were waiting for my dad's coffee to cool down on the counter. When we walked back into the kitchen, we found the dog standing on her hind legs, licking out of his cup. We quietly washed the cup and got him a new one, never telling him. If he had known, he would have thrown out the mug, and it was one I had bought for him with my own savings for Christmas when I was in second grade. I would have been upset if he had thrown it out. To this day, he still doesn't know, and I'm pretty sure he'd throw out that mug if he ever found out. Yes, he still has it. Story 33. When I was a kid, my older sister, maybe around 9 or 10 at the time, asked my mom if she could help her pull the car into the garage. For some reason, my mom, not using her best judgment, decided to let her. Well, my sister accidentally stomped on the gas pedal and drove the car right through the back of the garage and into our kitchen. To cover it up, my mom told my dad and the rest of us siblings that she had driven the car into the kitchen because she thought she saw one of us out of the corner of her eye and panicked. It wasn't until years later that I found out the truth. My parents separated a few years after that, and my dad didn't know the real story for a long time, like 10 to 15 years later. Now my sister's 35, and we all laugh about it. Story 34. My dad and I used my savings to help pay for my older brother's apartment. My brother had just graduated from the same out-of-state college I was attending at the time, but hadn't landed a full-time job that would cover his bills. He was stuck in a lease and didn't want to move back home, so my dad asked if he could borrow money from me to help cover the rent payments. My parents were contributing too, and if we could keep it a secret from my mom. He said she would panic and worry unnecessarily. At the time, I was working a minimum wage job at the university, and since I didn't have many expenses, I had a decent amount saved up. My brother was making very little, using what he could to cover whatever bills he could and get by on cheap food, while my parents and I helped with the rent. My mom didn't know for a long time how bad the situation was and how much my brother was struggling. It was really hard for me to keep that secret, especially knowing she had no idea what was going on right under her nose. It also gave me some anxiety around money. Edit. When I say proper adult job, all I meant was that he was working part-time in a position at the work-study office that had been slightly modified so he could continue there after graduation. It was originally meant for students, and no disrespect to anyone about the type of job they have. Story 35. My dad and I were cutting down a tree in the front yard. We had made an angle cut to direct the tree to fall at a 90-degree angle to the house, in between some other trees, but we didn't have a guide rope or any other way to direct it. As we made the final cut, and the tree began to fall, it was clear it wasn't going where we intended. It fell towards the house, narrowly missing it, and landed right between the deck and some other trees. Luckily, my mom wasn't home at the time. We quickly cut the tree into firewood-sized pieces and cleaned up the mess, making sure to cover up the spot where the tree had fallen. She was never told. To put this into context, when this happened, I was over 40 years old and was the one cutting the tree. My dad was standing safely out of the way, trusting that I knew what I was doing, while my daughter was standing on the deck watching the whole thing unfold. Story 36. Like many other nerds growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, I was occasionally bullied at school. It wasn't anything too severe. I didn't get regularly beaten up, but there were plenty of petty pranks, harassment, and mean-spirited jokes. My mom always told me to stick with the classic advice of, just ignore them and they'll go away. But that never worked. All it did was encourage the bullies to escalate and try harder to get a rise out of me. One day, an older kid poured a can of drink over my head at lunch. I turned around and did my best to fight back, and surprisingly, I actually held my own. Despite being smaller, I ended up knocking out a couple of his teeth before teachers pulled me off him. Since the kid had a history of bullying younger boys, and there were witnesses to the drink incident, plus, I was obviously soaked. I got off pretty lightly with just a stern talking to and a sentence of walking home early from school. My dad was working from home while my mom was at work, so he was the one who got the call. When I got back, he sat me down and asked 2 questions. Did you start it? And did he deserve it? I answered no and yes, respectively. He then said, all right, go wash up and then let's watch TV. Don't mention this to your mom. I'm not sure if he ever told her, but I highly doubt it. She's the kind of person who wouldn't let something like this slide, so I suspect he kept it from her. My dad hasn't always been the most involved parent. He was definitely the laid-back, hands-off one, which didn't always lead to the most active parenting. But that day remains one of my fondest memories of him. We spent the rest of the afternoon ignoring his work calls and watching Robot Wars on VHS together. Story 37. One day, my mom accidentally left the fire on low heat on the stove and didn't notice it. She was washing a plastic bucket and, without thinking, set it to dry over the open flame. Then she went to the bathroom for about 10 minutes. When she came back, the stove was on fire. We tried putting it out with water, but it wasn't working, so we called the fire department. They showed up and put it out, but thankfully the fire didn't spread beyond the stove, though the ceiling was completely blackened. We spent the next little while scraping the ceiling like crazy before my dad came home. We never told him what happened because he would have freaked out and probably been anxious about it for months. Plus, he would have been mad at my mom for years. He never noticed, and to this day, we laugh about how we ran around like maniacs cleaning everything up before he got home. It was early in the morning, so no neighbors were around to see the chaos. If they had been, we probably would have been doomed. Story 38. When I turned 21, my parents decided to take me out to a fancy cocktail bar to show me what upscale drinking was all about before I inevitably became a degenerate with my friends who were also turning 21. We visited a few cocktail bars, and without fail, every single bartender carded me. Of course, that was expected. But what I didn't expect was that they also carded my mom at each bar, much to her surprise and delight. She was practically giddy, telling me how being carded made her feel 21 again and young. At the time, I just assumed it was a coincidence. A year or two later, I was hanging out with my dad and mentioned the evening as a fond memory. I joked about how funny it was that all the bartenders thought my mom needed to be carded. My dad looked at me and said, "Oh, I told them to card her. I knew it would make her feel young." Unbeknownst to me, my mom had been feeling older, watching us grow up and leave for college. To this day, I haven't told my mom the truth, but whenever that story comes up, my dad and I share a smile. He's a good man. Story 39. I was about 14 when my dad and I got into a trading card game together and started going to local tournaments. My parents were divorced, and my dad had custody of me. One weekend, a tournament coincided with my scheduled visit to my mom. She knew about the tournament, and when I asked if I could postpone the visit, she refused. So, my dad came up with a plan. I could pretend to be sick and go play. I went along with it. Well, my mom didn't buy it. On the day of the tournament, she drove down to the game store and asked if I was there. The owner, who knew me, said he would check in the back. He quickly warned my dad and me, and we hustled me out the back door. I snuck off to a nearby pizza place, ordered some food, and waited there until I got the call that they had left. My dad later told my mom that he'd shown up because he wanted to play, but that I had stayed home sick. They were frustrated but left. After the coast was clear, I came back with my pizza and finished the tournament. They had paused everything, waiting for me to return. To this day, I've never told my mom about it. Story 40. My dad always stood by my mom after their big fights. He'd take us kids out for ice cream or find a way to get us out of the house for a bit. No matter how crazy the argument, he wouldn't let us say anything bad about her. He'd take the blame, telling us it was his fault every time, and the worst thing he'd ever say about her was, "You know how your mom is." My mom never knew about this. She often told us she was tired of being the bad guy or the bad parent. I don't think she ever realized how lucky she was to have him. Honestly, I don't think any of us did. How lucky we were to have him in our lives, until he was gone. My dad loved my mom, supported her, and always defended her to us, as if it was his mission. Strangely, that was the big secret we all shared without realizing it. His love and acceptance of her were something we all knew, and she was the only one who didn't. I guess she couldn't truly believe it or accept it. When I think about how much my dad loved her, I feel a mixture of sadness and gratitude. I'm thankful that he loved her and stuck by her through everything. But I'm sad because she never knew how much he defended her, how deeply he loved her. I think he struggled with the same thing. He didn't know how much we loved him either. If not being able to accept the love of another or your family is a love language, I think both of my parents spoke it. I just hope he knew how much we loved him, how much he meant to us. I miss him every day. Story 41. 6 years ago, I was sued for $125,000, and only my dad and I know about it. It all started when I got my first dog, an 8-week-old pup named Boxeely. I loved him so much. When he was 1.5 years old, he was hit by a car and severely injured. After several traumatic vet visits, his paw healed, but he became wary of hands. He bit me a few times, and even my brother once, which landed him in the hospital for stitches. My mom and stepdad were furious. They threatened to come over with a gun, saying the dog would bite a kid, ruin my life, and cause a financial disaster. In a way, they were right. But I loved my dog, and I fought back, defending him. He wasn't mean, he had been through a lot, and it wasn't his fault. I knew how to be around him. A year later, I had a girl over. I told her not to pet his face, but she did anyway. He bit her, and although she played it cool for a couple of days, she eventually ghosted me. A week later, I was served with a personal injury lawsuit. Cops showed up at my door, and I was kicked out of my apartment because the property manager was also named in the lawsuit. I made the painful decision to put my dog down and move apartments overnight. My dad was there through it all, offering advice, emotional support, and most importantly, keeping it all a secret because he knew the emotional toll it was taking on me. I told my mom a lie about why I put Boxili down, saying I found a great deal on an apartment and moved overnight because I didn't want to go back to the old apartment where I had my dog. I ended up being dropped as a defendant in the case and became a key witness, mostly due to having no assets. Still, I had to attend a nerve-wracking deposition. Through all of this, my dad kept quiet. I'll never be able to thank him enough for that. For years later, it's our secret. Rest in peace, Boxili. When I leave this world, you'll be the first spirit I connect with. Story 42. During the last year I studied architecture, I hit a breaking point. Stress and depression completely overwhelmed me, to the point where I could barely function. I was on the edge of failing what should have been a relatively light workload, which would have led to me being debarred. One morning, my little sister saw me crying in frustration because I couldn't focus while working on a project. When I finally confessed to my mom just how badly I was struggling, she had already noticed how difficult things were for me. She suggested that I drop my courses that semester, telling me we'd keep it a secret from my dad. My dad was the one who pushed me into architecture in the first place and kept encouraging me to stick with it, despite me expressing how much I disliked it. He had a bad temper, and though he was never physically abusive, his emotional abuse was constant. He never listened to anyone's needs, and I knew he would never understand my decision to quit. If it weren't for my grandparents stepping in, seeing how miserable I was, I don't think he would have ever let me stop studying architecture. My mom and I never told him I dropped the courses because we knew he'd think my sisters and I were ganging up on him, and the last thing I wanted was to provoke another one of his rages. Story 43. My dad still doesn't know the day I completely lost respect for him. I overheard an argument between him and my mom. He was drunk, crying about how she never let him be a man, or some nonsense. His main complaint was that she wouldn't let him pay his truck loan, but the reality was that she tried to let him, and he kept missing payments, which ended up costing us money we didn't have. The next day, I talked to my mom and finally got her to open up. That's when I found out that most of the gifts he gave her were attempts to make up for the countless times he cheated on her. She also told me he gave her herpes halfway into their marriage. Oh, and one of the times he cheated was at our house, with my mom's friend, who was staying with us to escape her abusive ex. I always wondered why that woman just disappeared. My mom gave her $100 and told her to never come back to town. For most of my life, my mom hid just how terrible my dad was. He still has no idea that I know any of this, but to be honest, we barely talk, maybe once a year at most. Story 44. My family has always pushed me towards independence. When I first went off to university, my dad would take me to do my weekly food shopping. I'd fill the cart with steaks, expensive booze, and other indulgences, and as my parents were leaving after helping me move in, my dad would slip me some cash. My mom always hated it. After university, I headed to China to work at a law firm, but I was pretty broke. My parents helped finance the move and gave me some extra spending money. The day I was leaving for China, my dad, mom, and grandpa came with me to the airport in some weird family vortex. We got to the flight boards, and my dad said, "I'll come check with you." As we approached, he handed me a little envelope with about $500 inside, telling me it was for drinks with friends. He made it clear that my mom would hate the idea of him giving it to me, so I should keep it a secret. While my dad and grandpa went off to buy me snacks for the plane, my mom pulled out a travel cash card with $400 on it, sticking a note on it that said, "For emergencies." She told me, "Don't tell your dad, I don't want him to know I'm giving you this." I thanked her and slipped it in my pocket. Finally, as my mom and dad went to the bathroom before they left, my grandpa shook my hand and handed me a stack of cash from his wallet. "Don't tell your mom and dad. They'll hate me for helping you, but we're proud of you," he said. I slipped it in my pocket, bringing the total to around $1,300. I'm pretty sure none of them knew the others had given me anything, and they all wanted to keep it a secret from each other. Story 45. This is a bit unsettling, but one day my brother was going through our mom's county court records and found a divorce record from a man she was married to a few years before she married our dad. He told our dad first, and he was shocked because he had no idea she'd been married before. None of us knew. We never confronted my mom about it, and my dad was really hurt by the fact that she had kept it from him. To this day, it's a secret we still keep, and my mom has never mentioned that divorce. Another moment with my dad happened even before that. When I was 2, I caught pneumonia and had to be hospitalized. I had heard the story growing up, but never knew the full reason behind it. One day, when I was a teenager, I was sitting in the car with my dad at the hospital and started asking him how I ended up getting pneumonia, trying to get some details. Eventually, he blurted out that my mom hadn't been taking care of me because she was out cheating on him. I was stunned because I never thought of my mom in that way. He made me promise not to bring it up to her, and I never did. Story 46. When I was a reckless and naive 20-year-old, living at my parents' house, I decided to make some special cookies. I told my dad he couldn't have any since I was saving them for something. After baking, I left them to cool and went over to a friend's house for the evening. When I got home later, 3 of my special cookies were missing. I thought, well, I guess Dad's going to have some wild dreams, and went to bed. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to my mom telling me to get up and wait outside for the ambulance. At first, I thought I was dreaming and tried to go back to sleep, but then she came back, and I was wide awake, completely confused. She said she thought my dad was having a stroke and had called 911. I asked what was going on, and she explained that he had woken up from psychedelic dreams and was too sick to even stand. That's when I realized I had messed up. I confessed to my mom that I had made special cookies, and when I checked, I saw 3 were missing, meaning my dad must have eaten them. We had one of those oh no moments, and shortly after, the paramedics arrived. They tried to help my dad stand, but he was too sick, so they had to carry him to the ambulance. I ended up sitting in the emergency room, nervously Googling whether they could find THC in your bloodstream without testing for it specifically. Thankfully, the answer was no. My dad was starting to feel more coherent, and he was talking to the doctor about what could have caused these psychedelic dreams. The doctor was uncertain, but mentioned that it might have been the icy hot patch my dad had used on his back before bed. My dad even suggested that he'd read somewhere that prolonged use of the patch could cause strange side effects. The doctor agreed it could be a possibility, but again, wasn't sure. They released my dad without an official explanation. Nearly 10 years later, my dad still thinks it was the icy hot patches. My mom never let the truth slip, and I'm just grateful nothing more serious happened to him. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.